of our young pastors has 3 beautiful little girls, and one of them was watching the latest royal wedding from a faraway land called England with her mother. And at some point, and I don't know what it was, but they must have said something or shown something that just triggered this shocking awareness in this young girl, because her next awestruck response said it all. Wait, Mom, you're telling me there are real princesses in the world? Why, yes, there are, honey. We've got to go there. Mom, we've got to see them. Now, that's a cute story, but it actually applies to more of us than I think we might first imagine. See, when we read all the grand stories of the scriptures and these faraway lands and all of these adventures and the bold faith of these heroes, sometimes it stays there, like far away and almost not real to us. And then sometimes, to some of us, there is this awakening, this jolt of insight that speaks of a deeper truth. And all of a sudden, it happens. Wait, there are real princesses and princes in this world? Why, yes, there are. Adopted children of the king, welcomed into the royal family and given real work to do in this kingdom. Now, maybe that's a little too romantic for some of you. I'm not suggesting we'll all ride in on steeds of white with glistening armor and, well, you get the idea. That's not it at all. But, and this language comes up later, we who have turned to Jesus, we who have repented, as chapter 5 explains, we who have been forgiven are also called and empowered to get stuff done in this world as sons and daughters of the King. But here's the question. Do we live up to this identity, or do we roll our eyes at such things? You know, it just seems like it's too much, or the trouble in the world is so much more than we expected that most of us are still tempted at times to play it safe and settle. But Romans 8 tells us that there is more to us. The very Spirit of God has taken up residence in us, whispering to us the truth of our adoption by Abba, our Father. So we're not alone. Certainly we're not perfect, but we are not alone, and we have been adopted and protected and empowered. And I think that's the good news of the gospel. So I would tell you at this point in the book that the life you want, the one that lives up to this new identity, the life that lives out the truth of the gospel, doesn't happen all at once. But it doesn't happen at all if we never start. That's why that verse from the back of the book of Joshua still rings in my ears. Choose you this day. Make a decision, take a step, even if it's not all that noticeable or tweetable, even if it's a private act of obedience that seems like it's mostly between you and God. Do it. Choose, step, act, risk, and see what happens next. Of course, I'm not a scientist, and you'll be able to tell from this very elaborate drawing that we're going deep into subatomic physics now. But I've been told that if you bombard the nucleus of a certain uranium atom with a neutron, it will split into 2 more parts, releasing massive amounts of energy in the process. And of course, then this splits, and so on, and so on, and so on. What you begin to see here is that this splitting and spitting happens again and again and again. And well, you already know this because we went over it in chapter 6. And yes, it will be on the test. But this is what scientists call a chain reaction. Just one little atomic action starts a reaction that releases more power and energy than you can imagine. And that's the point, really. One little particle strategically aimed has that big an effect. Think of it. One person in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. I mean, they may not be famous or powerful, but that one act of obedience releases a power that is really, it dwarfs anything that a physics professor can describe. And now I think we're back to the power of the Holy Spirit at work in us. See, we keep underestimating the power involved when we take that first step, even if it's unnoticed. We forget how God will use that obedience to ripple through lives that affect other lives. And yes, it really does start small usually, but that's how things work in this life. And honestly, I think that's how the world changes. One life, one choice, one conversation, one act of obedience at a time. Even in the smallest moments of your life, you can start chain reactions of grace and goodness in far-reaching ways. Now, try to imagine what might yet happen, like in the next moment, the next season of your life, when you partner with the God who called all of this into existence. Can you even imagine what that next step towards Him and towards His plan, can you even imagine what that might yield?
So Jude, can you believe, it's been 26 years since we met.
I know, 26 years, and oh my gosh, moving here 1,000 miles away, just coming here, not knowing anybody, and afraid, and young,
and you were pregnant.
And Steve was working a million hours. You guys, for a long time, didn't even know I was married.
No.
And I remember just being so lonely.
Yep, and that's one of my first remembrances of actually meeting you in the cul-de-sac, which was, I think you sat in the yard to try to make friends.
I did. I got the dog to make friends.
It's like, all the women, please come out and have a conversation.
Right around that time, I remember being so lonely, going and sitting in the cul-de-sac and just waiting for somebody to drive home from work. And you would pull the car in, pull the garage door up, get the girls on their bikes and stuff, and you would come down and play in the cul-de-sac, and I would wait. We spent hours in that cul-de-sac.
Hours. But yeah, the girls were kind of our initial bonding with each other and just hanging out in the circle, into the street and all that jazz. You start asking big questions of life.
Well, I was pregnant and scared to death, and all of a sudden you're pregnant and going, uh-oh, I don't know the big answers of life. What am I going to say to a child? And start asking you these really scary questions.
Yes, but I mean, if you think about this, we were two of the oddest human beings ever to have become friends.
Totally were.
I was this little churched girl, and you were a raging atheist.
I could maybe get through a sentence without dropping the F-bomb back then. Maybe. On a good day.
On a good day, yes.
On a good day.
But it was amazing that we gravitated to each other, I think.
I know. You somehow I found out you were a Jesus follower. But it wasn't because you were carrying a big old Bible around and smacking me over the head. You just gradually mentioned it. And I think for somehow you created a safety for me to start asking questions to you.
Well, deep down inside my gut, I was dying a million deaths because you were the scariest person I'd ever known. Well, I mean, my world had been in this little box.
Yeah, little Miss Robin in a little churchy box.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. Really, it's just that was my culture that I had been around. But all of a sudden, I was at a new church, and you were not theory anymore. We talked about people that didn't know Jesus and how do you begin a conversation.
I do remember even later you telling me I was the first really raging skeptic, seeker, doubter you had ever come across. And you were the first nice Jesus follower I'd ever met.
Yeah, and I think that was part of what motivated me so much, is to go, I have the greatest story in the world, and you've had the most negative impact from people that carry that story. And I wanted that to change, but I was scared to death I was going to screw something up because I'd never done this before. But I think the change was that it was a relationship between us. I wasn't just meeting you as a stranger and starting up this conversation about God. We kind of earned the right to have that conversation, I think.
Not once, especially back in the beginning, did you pound me with the Bible or judge me or do anything like that. It was always this safe environment where you never rolled your eyes, and oftentimes you answered questions with a story. And it just wooed me in.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I remember.
Yeah, because I had moved 1,000 miles from everything I knew. Steve was working 100 hours a week. Was raising a baby by myself, and I was a little toxic.
Yeah.
Walk out in the cul-de-sac and gossip and yell and scream.
Yes.
And
we had a conversation about that.
Yeah, it did. And I remember you saying that gossiping about your husband isn't going to help your marriage. And okay, I'm going to coach you. I'm going to give you words to go back in. How do you talk to Steve very gently?
Right.
And by golly, it worked. Every time you coached me, it worked. What I didn't realize is you were teaching me biblical skills like Matthew 18 conflict resolution, but you never said, I'm now going to teach you what the Bible says about conflict resolution. You just did it.
Yeah.
And I kept trusting you more and more with the big life questions because I'm thinking, oh, what she's saying is actually working. And you just kept taking baby step after baby step, one step at a time. And I would come at you with some really heated things.
Oh, you came at me with very, very hard questions. And again, I said earlier, I was so afraid I was going to screw this thing up because I had never dealt with things like this before. But then there was a day that I said, do you have any more questions?
I remember that day. And I thought, uh-oh, no. And that was a defining moment in my life.
And that was the moment that you said, Jesus is mine.
Yep, I'm ready.
Yeah,
he is mine. I knew in that moment it would have taken me more faith not to believe. And that's the day I knew. It was time after all the questions to give my life to Jesus. And here we are all these years later.
Yeah.
Who would have known?
No.
From being an atheist, agnostic, skeptic, doubter, seeker, to now somebody who's actually a pastor. It's hilarious and remarkable and unbelievable.
Right.
And
but for me, I sit here and I go, me walking out the door and choosing to have that conversation started a chain reaction.
Yep.
Something I never would have anticipated. And what has happened in your life after that has been another chain reaction.
Yep.
That is so much bigger than anything I could have ever even imagined. I didn't know that in the beginning.
Yep. Yeah, I sit back and go, if you would not have walked down to that cul-de-sac, where would I be right now? You know, because just the act of you leaving your house and coming and talking to a stranger started a huge chain reaction.
And it's affected you?
Yeah, and my husband and my two kids and a whole lot of people.
And a whole lot of people.
Just because you chose to take a step out the front door. You chose to start the chain reaction.
This deeper life where you know that God is up to something rarely happens spontaneously. It requires an intentional move on your part. Now, he's closer than you remember, and he's ready. And honestly, again, we might be underestimating the ways in which that next step will echo through the rest of the story. But we'll never know unless we make that choice. I will tell you, one of the most difficult choices that any of us will make is when we choose to be a peacemaker when everything around us is shouting to do something else. It might be that there's a voice screaming on the inside as well, that, getting even or jumping into the ugliness or just venting all your frustrations might just relieve all that's building up inside. Jesus, in the most famous sermon that has ever been preached, said these words, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Now, no, he didn't say, "Blessed are the peace fakers" or "Blessed are the peacekeepers." It doesn't say, "Blessed are those who don't stand up for the truth, who don't speak out when speaking out is the thing to do." It doesn't say, "Blessed are those who blend in." It doesn't say, "Blessed are those who sort of fake at this idea of peace." No, this is a very active concept. And these are people who actually end hostilities and even bring the quarrelsome together. And as we mentioned in the book, it may cost you. This is about valuing a relationship so much that you're willing to pay the cost of making peace. And it means you're more interested in facing the truth than avoiding pain. Sometimes it means loving someone enough that you really are going to speak the truth in a graceful way. It means that you love someone enough to work towards genuine reconciliation. And you begin to point out things that can be fixed, things that must be fixed for the bridge to be built. It can be any of those things, but I will tell you this, it always means that you are longing for the best in those people's lives. It means bringing a message, a word, a gesture that opens up the hope for real change and healing so that nobody involved in this conflict has to live in isolation one moment longer. That's what we're trying to imagine. Breaking the cycle of ungrace is how Philip Yancey puts it. And here we are again. It requires taking initiative. It requires taking a step. So if you value reconciliation, then it's your move. And when you do this, when you are a peacemaker, Jesus says you'll be called a child of God. Now, we stressed this in the book, but I want to take a chance here one more time to just make sure that we understand that when we talk about the need for God's grace, I don't want any of you to think for 1 minute that what is being implied here is that you can impress God and earn your way into a connection with Him and experience His forgiveness because of some action like that you took. No, it's always going to be the grace of our Lord Jesus. It always comes back to the price paid on the cross. This is what we look to. This is everything. As we've been saying, the New Testament tells us that those of us who looked at Jesus, we've been welcomed into the family of God. As one commentator puts it, there really is something especially godlike in bringing people to peace and bringing peace to people. So here we are in this world where you and I on some days can't even hardly imagine peace. And yet when we enter the fray, when we enter into the chaos, Jesus says there's a family resemblance. Now, let's go to that story that's covered in the chapter and just real quickly, just remember a few things and give you some ideas to think and to talk through with each other. But this is at the end of what is called a conquest. The major battles are over. There's still more that is coming. But Joshua, the man, the leader, the successor to Moses, is now an old man himself. And so the 12 tribes of Israel are being allotted their portions of the land. And, you know, if you look at it, some tribes are given more than others, but it's all been settled and everyone agrees. So now let's just pick this up after the major battles. The land has been divided. It's time for everyone to go home and they will settle their land. But first, the old general summons some of the tribes, like 2.5 of the tribes, to a place, let's just say it's about here, Shiloh. Now this is where the people were worshiping. This is where the tabernacle was, and they get a special send-off. Some of them are going to be settling on the other side of the Jordan. These are the tribes. 2.5 of them will be settling on the east side of the Jordan. We won't go into it. It's in the book, but you know they made an arrangement with Moses, and they've kept a promise. They helped the people move into the land, and now they're going home. So that's great. He wants to thank them. He wants to send them off, and I want you to just imagine now you've got these people who've been in really a time of great struggle and challenge for years. They have been at war for years. And now here they are. They're going to begin to move down and across the Jordan River and into their future. I can't even imagine what stories they were telling and things that they were thinking about and reminiscing and giving thanks to God and cherishing each other's relationships and really just telling a lot of stories. But as they get closer to actually leaving this side of the Jordan and crossing over, somebody comes up with an idea, and the idea was simply, hey, let's build sort of a monument so that we can remember this. And the problem was, as you can see in Joshua 22, is that the monument looked an awful lot like what was built up here at Shiloh. A mistake was made here. They build this monument without really thinking of what it might look like to their brothers and sisters, these fellow Israelites. And all of a sudden, these people, like the majority of Israel, thinks that this remnant that's now moving has already kind of slipped back into idolatry. They're going to start their own religion. And so war is about to happen. The first thing you got to remember is mistakes happen. If you keep reading, it will say, we heard, when the Israelites heard. And I want you to understand that part of what we have to be aware of in these moments when a war, a conflict is about to break out, is a lot of this is going to be built on hearsay. What someone said, and I heard, and then you said, and then she said. And I just want to say one more time that hearsay alone is not worth your getting in trouble. It's not worth your jumping into conflict over. You see, these 2 tribes, the next thing that happened, 2.5 tribes that build this monument are now accused by everybody else of being in rebellion. Maybe the next thing for us to remember is that we need to watch out for those sort of knee-jerk reactions where when we hear maybe part of the story or half of the story, we immediately fill in the rest of the story. And can we just say these days, we always fill it in with like the worst case scenario. So these people are ready to go back to war. Think about it. They've been fighting for years. Here they are. They've barely put their weapons away. And it's time. Let's go. Is it possible that you and I live in an era right now where we are so used to conflict and we are so used to just the next thing that's going to be argued about, or the next threat that's going to be made online, or the next big blow up that's going to happen, whether it's on social media or in our families or in our friendships or at work? Is it possible that we're so used to conflict that it's almost the default reaction? Now, we're not really even sure what else we can do. Thank goodness this story tells us. The next thing that happened with Israel was they actually sent a delegation down to this area with Phinehas, the high priest. And what does he do? He starts asking curious questions. He starts asking humble questions. I can't tell you how difficult it is for me to sometimes ask those questions when the rest of what's going on in my head is, I already know the story. I already know why you did this. But do I? What if there was more to the story? What if I stay open to someone's answer? What if I even give them a chance to begin to explain themselves? That's what Phinehas is doing. And then what if there really is more to the story? What if I stay open to the answer that I'm given? Now, the problem gets stated out loud, and we talk about this, but it's really acknowledging the elephant in the room. Go on ahead and say that. It really is what was needing to be discussed. But even then, there was a way back to relationship that was eventually offered. You see, the 2.5 actually confess that they've made a mistake, and they explain what they were trying to do, and that they were already feeling homesick, and they really weren't trying to create a new religion, and they still want to be a part of all of this. A way back to relationship was actually offered right here, even though it would be costly. This is one of my favorite parts of the story. Some of the 9.5 plead and are basically saying, listen, if you don't like your land anymore, like on this side of the Jordan, if you don't like your land anymore, come live with us. Even if it's going to cost us something, come live with us. I mean, can you imagine what it's like to actually make things right when it's going to cost you something? Now, the 2.5 respond with transparency, and they confess what they did wrong, but they explain what they were trying to do. We're not trying to start our own religion. We really did just want this to be a reminder. We're homesick. We hope that you understand. And here is where it all really is now hanging in the balance, because Phinehas, the high priest, this guy who has lots of power and great influence in this moment. And I want you to understand, this is a pivotal moment for you, because when you are the one that everyone is looking to, it might just be your family, it might be a couple of people at work, it might be something much larger. But when everyone is now looking to you and how you're going to react, but in their minds, they are ready to rumble, it's going to be up to you to hear what God is saying. And that's exactly what Phinehas did. He saw it from their perspective. He wasn't thrilled with their decision, but he understood the whole story. And now what does he do? He leads the others to reconciliation. He turns back to essentially his crew, his people, and he explains for the 2.5 tribes what they were trying to do to the 9.5 tribes. And I want you to hear that part of making peace in the coming days will be you and I, in a loving, courageous way, turning back to our crew and to our people and saying, I think there's a way out of this. Let me explain a little bit of this. You see, they didn't want to be right just to be right. They really did want peace. And so the question, even if we're not the one who's leading the conversation, are we pleased or are we disappointed in such moments? I want you to be very aware and cautious of this adrenaline that gets pumped into your system. And then there's a letdown because you're ramped up and your emotions are high, and it can almost feel like there's nowhere to go when the conflict is averted. I love what happens in the story next, because if you're not sure what to do with all of that emotion that gets built up, what these people did was they worshiped. I believe they cheered. I think they cried. I think they thanked God. There was such a relief. This is what they longed for. And then this, they talked no more about going to war with each other. And for a time, this imposing monument actually it came to symbolize a kind of unity between all of these people and the God who had united them. Now, of course, we have an even greater symbol of unity that has endured far past this story, and it is the cross. And in light of all that God has done for us and invited us into, I would just say today, next week, next month, before the blood starts spilling back into our world, before things begin to happen in what really is a kind of a Hatfield and McCoy world for us these days, before hearts are broken, before words are shouted, before regrets linger in the air, before somebody posts something that they can't pull back, before friendships are destroyed and bridges are dismantled, before families walk away from the table, never to come back together, I want you to think back to this little 3,000-year-old history lesson and remember, for the sake of peace, for the sake of this flourishing life, for the sake of being fully alive, and entering into a world that so desperately needs to see a different way to do this, I would say run to the border, right? And get this. When we do this, we will bear a resemblance to the royal family, you sons and daughters of the King. This is what it looks like to live into our identity and up to our calling.